Welcome to the Stories Creeper. Apartment 18, the most haunted unit you've never heard of. Tonight, we journey into the heart of a building that should have been demolished, where shadows move when you're not looking, and some tenants never leave. Apartment 18 isn't just cursed, it's alive. Over the years, those who've lived there vanished, one by one. Their stories buried behind bricked-up walls, their screams lost in static-filled air. But now, you're about to hear what really happened, who dared to move in, what secrets still breathe behind the peeling wallpaper and the blood-stained floorboards. Settle in. Dim the lights, because once you enter apartment 18, you may never leave the same again. Apartment number 18. The most dangerous door. There's a reason why some doors stay locked. A reason no one dares knock. In an old, decaying building on the east side of the city, apartment number 18 waits. Waiting, watching, listening for the next soul brave or foolish enough to cross its threshold. There was nothing particularly special about the building on Morrow Street. Just another fading structure in a neglected part of the city, with flaking paint, rusted balconies, and the soft scent of mildew lingering like an old memory. But to those who lived there, apartment number 18 was something else entirely. A place not just avoided, but feared. Everyone knew the stories. Every tenant had whispered warnings. Don't stay near 18 too long. Never speak its number aloud after dark. If the doors ever open, close your eyes and walk away. But stories are stories, right? They grow, stretch, twist over time. And for Eli Waters, newly moved in and desperate for a cheap place to land, tales of a haunted apartment sounded more like urban legend than truth. Until the first night, Eli had barely unpacked. The box-littered floor of his new unit, apartment 17, was still covered in unopened containers, dust motes swirling in shafts of fading light. The air inside the building was heavier than outside, thicker, but it was quiet at least. Mostly, that night, around 2:13 a.m., Eli heard the knock, not on his door, on the wall. 3 knocks, steady, slow, too deliberate. He froze. The wall to his left connected to apartment 18. No one lived there, the landlord had said. Hadn't been anyone there in years. Something about complications with the property. Eli pressed his ear to the wall. Silence. But as he pulled away, another sound followed. A soft dragging, like fingernails across plaster. Then a whisper. Not in English. Not in any language Eli had ever heard. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Eli asked the super, an old man named Henry, about 18. Henry paused, stared too long. You hear something? Eli hesitated. I thought I did. Henry gave a slow shake of his head. Best not to think too much about it. Doors sealed for a reason. Don't get curious. You hear me. But why? What happened in there? Henry's voice dropped low. 18 isn't haunted, son. It's hungry. And sometimes it knocks. But curiosity is a stubborn ghost, and Eli couldn't resist. That night, he returned with a flashlight and stood outside apartment 18. The hallway lights flickered as if reacting to his presence. The door was like all the others, brown, chipped paint, brass numbers. And yet, different. Eli reached out, just touched it. The moment his fingers brushed the wood, it was like something touched back. He recoiled, took a step back. Then the doorknob began to turn on its own. Click. The door creaked open just half an inch. Blackness inside. A thick, impenetrable darkness, as though light itself had no right to enter. And from that gap came a smell. Rot. Dust. And something burnt, like scorched flesh. Eli turned and ran. Over the next few days, things worsened. He started finding small handprints on his bathroom mirror, always fogged, even when he hadn't used it. His reflection sometimes moved out of sync. Doors opened by themselves. Lights flickered. A woman's voice called his name from inside his apartment. Only, he lived alone. One night, he found a note tucked under his door. Don't ignore it. The more you pretend, the closer it gets. Apartment 18 doesn't wait forever. No name, no handwriting he recognized, just the tremble of truth he could no longer deny. Then came the screaming, not his, not from another tenant. From apartment 18. A man's voice this time, screaming for help. Then, nothing. Eli grabbed his phone, called the police. But when they came, apartment 18 was sealed shut, covered in a thick chain padlocked in rust. The police tried opening it. It wouldn't budge. Claimed they didn't hear anything. You should get some rest, sir. They left. Eli didn't. He finally confronted Henry. What is it? What's in there? The old man sighed, and for the first time, his hands trembled. A long time ago, this building was a sanatorium. Before that, a convent. And before that, something else, older. There's always been something inside that room. Something that copies, that tempts, that pulls people in. We tried to trap it. Eli's breath caught. It can copy people? Henry nodded. That voice calling you, it'll start to sound like your mother, then your childhood friend, then maybe you. Why hasn't anyone destroyed the place? Henry looked him dead in the eyes. Because it won't let us. And once you've heard it, it knows your name. That night, Eli dreamed of the door. Only this time, he was inside apartment 18. The room was much larger than it should have been. Endless corridors, all pulsing like veins in the walls. Whispers slithered in the air. Shapes in the dark moved like broken marionettes. He ran toward what looked like a door, but it led only deeper inside. And then he saw himself, another Eli. Pale, smiling. You should stay. You're already part of the apartment now. He woke up, gasping. Eli packed his things, but the apartment wouldn't let him go. The elevator always stopped at the 5th floor. The stairwell spun into darkness, and every window looked out onto another hallway. Apartment 18 was spreading. The final straw came when he returned home to find his door opened, but he hadn't left it that way. Inside, sitting on his bed, was another him. It turned slowly. Grinned. You finally came back. I was getting lonely. Eli screamed and ran. The building was found empty 2 weeks later, no tenants. No blood. No signs of struggle. Only one note, written on the back of a lease form, found just outside apartment 18. It's not just haunted. It's alive, and it wants to move in. The door to 18 is now welded shut, but some nights, if you pass by Morrow Street, you'll hear the sound of a lock turning, a soft whisper calling your name. And if the door is open, don't look inside. Don't answer. And whatever you do, don't go in. If you enjoyed this horrifying journey through the cursed halls of apartment 18, hit that like button, subscribe for more spine-chilling stories, and share it with someone who loves a good scare. And remember, some doors are locked for a reason. Sweet dreams, if you can. Here's part 2 of the story, apartment number 18. Part 2. The archivist's 6 months had passed since Eli Waters vanished from the Morrow Street building. Most. The disappearance was just another unsolved case swallowed by the city's indifference. The building was quietly condemned, the upper floors chained off, and rumors swirled like smoke. But to Amira Caldwell, it wasn't just a story. It was her job. She was an archivist for the City Paranormal Registry, a quietly funded branch of municipal records that few knew existed. Her work was unglamorous, sorting case files, audio logs, grainy VHS tapes, and forgotten blueprints of buildings with strange histories. But apartment 18, it wasn't just strange. It was wrong. It began when a file labeled Morrow_18_restricted landed on her desk. No sender, no request, just a yellowing folder, bound with a black thread and sealed with a red wax mark she didn't recognize. Inside were photographs, burnt edges, black and white, of the building long before its current state. The earliest image dated back to 1894. The structure was then a convent. Another from 1916, during its time as an asylum. And then 1957, when it became the tenement it was today. And in every single photo, no matter the year, apartment 18's door was always slightly ajar. Even worse, in the corner of each photo was a faint figure, blurred, faceless, always standing inside the doorway. She blinked at the photos for a long time. Then she packed her bag and went straight to Morrow Street. The building looked worse in person. The gate was chained, the no entry sign barely clinging to the front. Cracked windows, black mold racing across the brick. But Amira had seen worse. What unsettled her most was the silence. No city noise, no birds, just air that hummed with a pressure you feel in your chest, not your ears. She slipped through a break in the chain fence and stepped into the hollow carcass of the building. Her boots echoed on the dust-covered floor. It wasn't just abandoned. It was waiting. She passed faded apartment doors, most still numbered in brass. Apartment 12, 13, 14. She paused outside apartment 17, Eli's old place. The door was open. Inside was untouched. Coffee mug still on the counter. Jacket slung over the chair. Like someone had just left for groceries and never returned. Amira pulled out her recorder. Date: March 5th. Location: Morrow Building. Subject: Apartment 18 case. Initial entry confirms previous residents' belongings remain. No signs of break-in. Will proceed to 18 shortly. She crossed to the far end of the hall. Stopped at the final door. Apartment 18. Chained and welded. Rusted thick. But something had clawed at the outside of the door frame. Deep gouges, like nails, or something worse. She touched the door. It was warm. Then the chains groaned. One link. Just one. Snapped. She staggered back. Then the door clicked and opened. Just an inch. Amira didn't enter immediately. She wasn't reckless. She set up a stationary camera across from the door, laid a chalk line across the threshold, and placed a motion sensor on the wall. Then she sat across from it and waited. Hours passed. Her eyes grew heavy. The hall dimmed unnaturally. And then something happened. The camera flickered. The motion sensor lit up. Once, twice, a third time. But no one was there. She slowly rose. Recorder in hand. Subject: Apartment 18. Door is open 1.3 inches. Temperature of air has dropped by 6 degrees. There is, whisper. She froze. That IT had come from inside. The whisper wasn't words. It was like breath being pulled backwards. Like someone inhaled her name. And then, her recorder shut off. She stepped closer. Looked through the crack. Only blackness. But in that void, she saw movement. Shapes. Slithering not across a floor, but across something like walls that breathed. Suddenly, a face appeared. Not pressed to the crack. Not visible in a normal sense. More like implied. The way an oil slick shows colors and shadow. It was watching her. And it knew her name. Amira. It said it exactly as her mother once had, soft and distant. She turned and ran. That night, she returned to her apartment. Slept with every light on. But when she reviewed her camera footage, her heart stopped. Because for 11 minutes, the camera inside the hallway had not been stationary. It had moved, slowly, shakily, into apartment 18. And the footage it recorded inside was impossible. The hallway looped. Over and over. Apartment 18 seemed to contain not a room, but infinite hallways, all connecting, intersecting, folding like veins in a nightmare. And every few frames, there were copies of her, blurry, slightly off, some smiling, some crying, one staring directly at the lens, whispering something over and over. She enhanced the audio. It repeated a phrase in her voice. Let me out. Let me out. Let me out. She returned to the registry. Demanded access to full archives. They denied her. Cases closed. Building sealed. Don't go back. But she had seen too much. And so she went rogue. She dug through forgotten maps. Learned the building had been constructed over something far older. A pre-colonial ruin with no records. Something worshipped. Or feared. She found an old name in a half-burned book, Korvalek. The Eater of Mirrors. A being that copies. It doesn't want souls. It wants selves. Faces. Voices. Thoughts. It collects them. Wears them. And apartment 18 isn't its prison. It's its mouth. She returned one last time. This time, armed with two things, a mirror and a question. Inside the hallway, the mirror trembled. She held it up, and the moment she did, she saw it. Not a monster, not a demon, herself, but wrong. Stretched mouth, black eyes, moving independently of her real self. It reached through the mirror, tried to pull her in. She screamed, smashed the mirror, and the hallway rippled like water disturbed. She barely escaped. The door slammed behind her. The welds resealed themselves, and on her back, carved in shallow, burning script, were the words. One of U.S. got out. Weeks later, Amira sits at her desk in the registry. She looks normal. She sounds normal, but she no longer sleeps, because she doesn't know if she made it out. Or if she left something else behind. And when she walks by a mirror, it sometimes lags. By half a second. Apartment 18 is still sealed, but it's listening, and it remembers her name, and yours. Here is part 3 of the haunted horror saga, apartment number 18. The janitor's keys. There are stories that hide in shadows, spoken only in whispers between tired breaths. Then there are the stories that refuse to stay hidden, like the one about apartment number 18, a place that doesn't just haunt people, it changes them. Not many remember Thomas Greaves. He wasn't a tenant, not a cop or a ghost hunter, just a janitor. Quiet, reliable, worked for the city's contracted building maintenance for nearly 40 years. The kind of man who knew every hallway, every boiler room, every flickering bulb. He was the one they called when Morrow Street building needed sealing off. Again, that he'd been there before. Back in 1998, before it was condemned the first time, before the fire, before the screaming. That he thought he buried that memory. But when the building came up again for demolition review, they found something strange in the blueprints. Apartment 18 no longer existed. Not on paper. Not on the current layout. The physical door was still there, yes, but according to every document, the unit was never built. Thomas was sent to verify. Alone. He didn't question it. Not out loud. But when he reached the 5th floor, something in the air told him, it's awake again. Thursday, 3:17 p.m. Thomas stood outside apartment 18. The same door he had passed dozens of times during routine inspections over the decades. Only now, it looked different. The frame was subtly warped, bulging slightly, like something inside was pressing to get out. His hand hovered over the keyring. He hadn't used the master key in years. Not since that night. The one he never told anyone about. The one where he saw his reflection walk away from the mirror. He sighed. Inserted the key. The lock turned by itself before he could. The air inside wasn't just cold. It was hollow, like the oxygen had been scraped out of the walls. The room didn't make sense. No furniture, no windows, just walls and doorways, too many of them. And in the center, on the warped floor, sat a pile of keys. Hundreds, thousands, all old, all corroded. He took a step inside. The door didn't shut behind him. It melted, the frame vanished, and in its place was him, standing exactly as he was, mirroring every motion. But this version smiled and said, "Took you long enough, Thomas." Thomas backed away, clutching his keyring like a weapon. The other him, the false Thomas, moved differently now. The eyes too wide, the smile too long. "I've been keeping everything clean," it said. "Just like you taught me." "What are you?" Thomas whispered. "I'm what's left behind when people close the door too late." He turned and ran, but the room twisted. Corridors unfolded like paper torn into impossible geometry. Doors appeared, each with a number 18. He opened one, only to find himself, younger, mopping blood off a tiled floor while a woman screamed in the distance. That he slammed it shut. Opened another, saw Eli Waters, curled in a corner, eyes hollow, mouth mumbling the same word. "Out, out, out, out." Closed it. Opened another, and saw Amira, staring into a mirror, her reflection moving out of sync. The apartment was feeding, storing versions, making copies. And then he heard the sound that haunted him since '98, the soft jingle of keys, dragging along metal. The figure walked out from the shadows. That IT wore his city uniform. It had no face, only a ring of keys wrapped around where its head should be. They jingled with every step. Thomas turned and ran through the corridor, choosing doors at random, the space folding tighter, breath shallower. He finally stopped when he saw something different. A closet. Inside it, a janitor's locker with a single note on it. "There's only one key that gets you out." He opened the locker. There, hanging on a hook, was a key made of glass. IT pulsed, glowed. He grabbed it, and the hallway cracked. Reality screamed. The false reflections wailed. The floor shattered beneath him. He plunged into darkness and landed outside apartment 18. He was on the 5th floor. The door was shut, locked. Behind him, silence. But his hand still clutched the glass key, and carved into its surface were 3 words. "One must stay." Thomas never left the city, but he never worked again. People say he sits in the archives now, not speaking. Sometimes he draws keys on napkins. Hundreds of them, none the same. And sometimes, when he falls asleep, he whispers in another voice, not his own. And always, always, he whispers one number, 18. Haunted Apartment Number 18. Part 4. The Hall of Echoes. The city was silent, swallowed whole by a heavy fog that drifted through every alley and crept beneath every window pane. But Apartment 18, now infamous, now whispered about in late-night diners and flickering online forums, was not quiet. Not tonight. Following the harrowing possession of Marla and the collapse of Father O'Reilly in the building's stairwell, the apartment had been sealed off by authorities. Boards covered the door. Salt lines were drawn across the floor. Symbols scorched into the wood. And yet, inside, something still breathed. Elias Granger, the building's caretaker from 3 decades ago, shuffled back into the city on the 4 a.m. train. No one knew where he'd gone, not even Elias himself. He'd vanished after the apartment was first built, back when tenants began disappearing in the 1990s, and Apartment 18 was the epicenter of it all. He didn't carry luggage, only an old brass key, tarnished, bent, etched with the number 18. His eyes were glazed, unfocused, as he stepped into the neighborhood. The buildings around him had aged, been repainted, remodeled, but not 14 Beldam Street. It looked exactly the same. Elias approached the boarded-up entrance, his steps eerily steady. He reached into his coat pocket, found a crumpled note with 5 words. "You never finished your job." The key turned without resistance. Detective Mina Lark hadn't slept in 4 days after the footage leaked. The footage of Marla's contorted body whispering ancient words through blackened lips. She was pulled from official duty. But she couldn't let it go. Something about that apartment dug into her, wrapped fingers around her spine, and refused to let go. She returned, flashlight and voice recorder in hand, pushing her way past the boards. Inside, the smell of rot was unbearable. Not mold, not death, something older. Womb dash like .as she stepped inside. The air temperature dropped. Frost curled along the edges of picture frames. The apartment was empty, yet filled. Something was listening. She approached the old rug in the center of the living room. The same one from the 90s police photos. The edges were frayed, but beneath it, wood gave way to soft, hollow knocks. She peeled it back at a trapdoor. It wasn't on the original blueprints. The descent felt eternal. A rusted spiral staircase spiraled downward into an expanse of black. Damina's flashlight flickered. Her boots clicked on metal, then stone. She reached a hallway carved from ash-black rock, lined with archways. Each arch framed a different scene, like moving paintings. In one, a girl screamed silently as shadows poured from her mouth. In another, a man wept blood as a bell tolled behind him. Each was alive. Each watched her back. At the end of the corridor stood a door. No handle, just bone. Etched symbols. She pressed her hand to it. That it opened with a breath. Inside, she found the Hall of Echoes. Thousands of voices murmured, trapped in jars suspended by black wire. Each whispered names, some hers, some others. One jar was broken. Its voice was loosed. It whispered from behind her. Mina, run. Elias sat in apartment 18's kitchen, a single candle illuminating his gaunt face. He waited for Mina. He didn't have to wait long. She burst through the trapdoor minutes later, panting, blood on her lip. Her flashlight cracked. Her recorder missing. You came back, he said. You never left, she hissed. What is this place? Elias exhaled deeply. Apartment 18 isn't a room. It's a gate. It's built on a wound. A what? He pointed toward the walls. This building, this room, it's anchored to something below the earth. Older than cities. Something that feeds on regret. On secrets. Mina's voice trembled. And you knew? I helped build it, he said. I didn't know then. But I know now. He reached into his coat, pulling out an old journal. The people who lived here, the ones who disappeared, they weren't taken. They were kept. As Mina flipped through Elias' journal, her hands shook. Pages were filled with accounts of former residents, dreams of falling through ceilings, voices coming from unplugged radios, shadows that mimicked their movements but never stopped moving. One page showed a blueprint, not of the apartment, but of a body. Veins replaced with pipes. A heart shaped like a door. The final line, Apartment 18 is alive. And it wanted her to stay. Suddenly, the candle flickered. The lights, dead for years, buzzed and hummed. The hallway filled with footsteps. Dozens, shuffling, scraping, coming closer. Mina, Elias said softly. Once the house chooses you, it never lets you go. Elias had one chance to stop it. He took the journal, whispered an incantation in a broken tongue, and slashed a deep cut across his palm. Blood fell in drops, forming a symbol on the floor. The building screamed. Yes, screamed. Windows shattered. Lights burst. The wallpaper peeled away to reveal faces beneath. Hundreds of them, screaming, begging. Elias dropped to his knees. Take me back, he begged the house. Let her go. The air twisted. A wind blew from within the walls. And then silence. Mina awoke in the alley outside the building. Alone. And oh, Elias. No journal. No apartment 18. Behind her. The building had crumbled into soot. Only the key remained in her pocket, etched with a new word, return. Haunted Apartment Number 18, Part 5. The basement of echoes. The cold of Apartment 18 was no longer confined to its four cracked walls and rotting floorboards. It had seeped through the foundation, down to the basement, where time hung like dust in the air. The basement wasn't listed on the official floor plan. It was whispered about in fragments. Maintenance workers never ventured there, and those who didn't remain in the building for long. A week had passed since Zara's confrontation with the mirror entity. Her nights had grown longer. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the burnt silhouette staring back from within the walls. Her roommate, Aaliyah, refused to sleep in the apartment anymore, opting to crash on friends' couches. Zara, on the other hand, had begun obsessing. It started with the sounds, low, incoherent mutterings coming from the drain in the kitchen sink. At first, she thought it was the pipes, but then she heard her name. Not just any name, but a version of it spoken with a voice that matched her mother's, who had been dead for 6 years. She leaned closer to the sink. Zara, help me, it's not what it seems. She recoiled. Her knees hit the edge of the counter. That voice, her mother's, but it came from beneath the drain, from the basement point too. The map of Zara began investigating the building's original blueprints. Hidden in the library's dusty archives, she found a redacted page that referred to a sub-basement level beneath apartment 18. Its layout looked like a grid: 8 rooms, a central corridor, and a circular chamber at the far end. Drawn in pencil beside the chamber was a warning in Urdu. The librarian, a thin elderly man with cataract-clouded eyes, snatched the paper from her hands. "Don't ask about the basement," he rasped. Many went looking. None returned the same. But Zara already knew she was going. That night at 2:14 a.m., she returned to the building and descended the main stairwell, bypassing the flickering elevator. The deeper she went, the colder it grew. She pried open the metal access hatch behind the electrical panel in the laundry room. Exactly where the old blueprint had shown, a rusted spiral staircase twisted down like a spine into the dark. She took the first step. Her flashlight flickered violently. Her ears popped. The air thickened with decay. The temperature dropped below freezing. When she reached the base, she found herself in a hallway covered in faint handprints, all facing inward, as if clawing to escape. Each room held remnants of something horrible. One had broken mirrors scattered on the floor, with bloodied handprints smearing the walls. Another was filled with dozens of dusty dolls, their heads turned toward the door. One room had chains hanging from the ceiling and scratch marks carved deep into the walls. In the 7th room, she found a mattress soaked in what looked like dried blood. But it wasn't the smell that made her scream. It was the fact that the blood was still wet when she touched it. The final chamber was exactly as the blueprint had shown, a perfect circle. In its center stood an altar of stone with carvings far older than the building itself. Lines of salt and ash formed a pentagram around it. She stepped across the salt line. Immediately, her flashlight died. The silence shattered. Whispers poured in from all directions, some weeping, others laughing, some calling her name in pleading agony. And in the center of it all stood a shape, pale, faceless, dripping black fluid from its limbs. "You came," it hissed. "The apartment is not haunted. It is alive. It feeds." Zara stepped back. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you listened." It lunged forward, dragging her toward the altar. Her screams were muffled by the sound of dozens of voices chanting in reverse. Her hands touched the altar. Visions exploded in her mind. Every tenant who ever vanished, every ritual that occurred here, every time the building feasted. When Zara awoke, she was alone, but something was different. She was in her apartment. Apartment 18. The floor was clean. The windows no longer cracked. The smell was gone. The building looked renewed, but her reflection didn't match. It smiled when she didn't. Then it spoke. "You belong to apartment 18 now." Her phone rang. A real estate agent's voice chirped happily through the speaker. "Hello. I was told you're the new landlord of the building. Would you like us to begin listing the vacant units again?" Zara, the landlord? She looked down at the keys in her hand. All 18 units. The mirror smiled wider. Point 7. The return of the Otishers each time a tenant moved in. Zara's eyes turned a little darker. The apartment whispered to her at night, asking for sacrifices. And one by one, the lights on the building directory flickered off. N01 remembered the names of the tenants. Only Zara did. Only apartment 18 did. Beneath the building, the circular chamber remained. The altar glowed faintly, and the whispers continued. Calling, waiting, feeding, tob continued. Apartment 18 Part 6. The hall light flickered again. Daniel didn't move. Not because he was afraid. He had long passed the stage of fear, but because he'd learned by now that apartment 18 reacted to movement like an animal sensing its prey. It listened, it waited, and sometimes it remembered. The air was thicker than usual tonight, like the walls themselves had been soaked in tar. He sat on the bare floor, legs crossed, eyes locked on the door that led to the corridor. The hallway beyond it hadn't been normal in months. A place that used to echo with the sound of neighbors' footsteps now felt like a grave. Something had changed since the last disappearance. Since Rachel, he still saw her in dreams. Or what passed for dreams now? Only they were more like intrusions. She would sit beside him silently, her eyes wide and distant, as though she were trying to warn him but couldn't speak. He'd wake up with scratches on his chest, messages and dust on his mirror. I never left. The apartment had its ways of reminding him that it owned him now. It wasn't possession in the traditional sense. No spinning heads, no floating bodies. It was quieter. A parasitic presence that twisted reality just enough to make escape impossible and madness inevitable. He stood slowly and turned toward the kitchen. The light over the stove buzzed, casting a jaundiced glow on the crumbling countertop. He hadn't cooked anything in weeks. The refrigerator was unplugged. Everything inside had spoiled, and when he'd opened it last, something had whispered his name from within. Tonight, he had a plan. Not for escape. He knew better than that. But for confrontation. There was an old rumor he'd found online, buried in a thread from 10 years ago. A man named Hector had lived in apartment 18 for a total of 3 nights. He disappeared after the 4th, but before he vanished, he left behind a journal. Daniel had spent weeks trying to find it. A former maintenance man who now lived in a trailer park 3 towns over claimed to have taken it after the police left. Didn't want that thing in the building no more, the old man said. It wrote itself at night. The journal now sat on the floor before him, wrapped in cloth and string. He hadn't opened it yet. The air changed when he touched it. The lights dimmed, even unconnected bulbs. Outside the apartment, the hallway grew darker. He could feel the walls leaning in, curious. His fingers trembled as he undid the string. The cloth fell away. The journal was bound in leather, the edges burned. The first page was blank except for a single sentence scrawled in what looked like dried blood. This place knows your name before you speak it. He flipped to the next page. Sketches of symbols. Diagrams of rooms with shifting layouts. Notes on whispers, time loops, neighbors that walked backward. Entire entries were scratched out violently, as if Hector had tried to unwrite what he saw. Day 2. I found a door behind the bathtub. It shouldn't exist. It leads to a stairwell that descends infinitely. I counted 2 hours going down. When I came back up, it was Wednesday. I left my apartment Monday night. Daniel looked toward the bathroom. The tub had been rusting for years, cracked down the center. He'd always avoided looking at it too long. Day 3. I heard my own voice coming from behind the walls. It begged me not to listen. It cried. It screamed. And then it laughed. It knows what I'm thinking. He felt the air shift again. Something was paying attention. The final page of the journal was soaked in black ink. Words blurred. Only one line remained clear. There's no leaving, only replacing. Daniel sat back. His hands trembled. A low hum began to fill the apartment, the kind that seemed to come from nowhere, like the building itself was breathing. And then he heard it dot a knock, not at the front door. From inside the walls that he turned slowly as the knock came again. Measured, deliberate, like knuckles on hollow wood. Then a voice, Daniel. It wasn't Rachel's, that it wasn't his own, that he crawled to the wall and pressed his ear to it. The drywall was ice cold. He could hear something moving behind it. A shuffle, a breath. Then, suddenly, laughter. Not human laughter. Not quite that it rose, echoing, until the entire apartment seemed to shake. Lights flickered. The ceiling cracked slightly. Water began to drip from the corners of the room. Not water. Thicker. Red. He backed away, heart pounding. The journal began to burn without flame. Pages curling inward. The symbols on the walls began to glow, slowly rotating. Then everything stopped. Silence. Not a natural silence, but a vacuum. Even his breath seemed soundless. Then the knock again. This time from the front door, that he didn't move. But the door opened anyway. Standing there was himself, only older, worn, eyes black as coal. His mouth moved, but no words came out. He simply raised a hand and pointed behind Daniel. Daniel turned slowly. The hallway had changed. It stretched impossibly long, filled with doors that pulsed like living organs. Each door bore a number, 18. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Daniel walked forward, unable to resist. The door behind him slammed shut. Then all the other doors opened in unison. From each, a figure stepped out. All of them versions of him. Some were wounded. Others wept. One dragged itself with broken limbs, its mouth sewn shut. They whispered in unison, "Replace. Replace. Replace." He screamed, but no sound came out. The floor crumbled beneath him, and he fell, past memories, past light, past time itself. Down, forever down, and the apartment waited for its next tenant. Apartment 18. The hollow that breathes. The walls were no longer just walls. They pulsed. They breathed. They remembered why now. The residents of the building refused to walk past apartment 18. The hallway lights would flicker and hum violently, as though warning them of something ancient and furious lurking within. Yet inside, the apartment itself had begun to warp the perception of time. Day and night blurred into one another like brushstrokes bleeding on damp canvas. Rafik hadn't slept in 3 days. Not because he couldn't, but because every time he closed his eyes, he awoke in a different version of apartment 18. Sometimes it was burned and rotting, sometimes pristine as if freshly built. But always, always, someone was watching from the corners. It began when the clocks inside the apartment stopped syncing. The kitchen clock spun backwards. The digital one on his phone glitched to midnight and never left. And the old grandfather clock in the lobby of the building, silent for decades, began to tick once more, louder each hour, louder still at night, and eventually so loud that Rafik would wake with blood trickling from his ears. Then came the phone calls, not to his mobile, but to the old rotary phone mounted to the kitchen wall, which he had assumed didn't work. It rang at exactly 3:18 a.m. every night that he never answered. Not until the 7th night. When he picked up, the silence on the other end wasn't silence. It was breathing. Labored, inhuman, wet breathing. Like lungs filled with ash. Like someone, or something, was learning to mimic life. Leave. Came the whisper, barely audible. Before it wears your face. Rafik dropped the phone and stumbled back. The apartment's air had thickened like soup. Each breath tasted like rust and rot. He fled to his landlord, Mr. Mirza, desperate for explanation. But Mr. Mirza, pale and jittery, refused to open his door all the way. "You live there now," he whispered. "You accepted the key. That place doesn't let go. It chose you." Desperation turned into research. Rafik dug into the archives at the local library, seeking anything tied to apartment 18. What he found made his stomach twist. Before the building was built in the 1950s, the land was home to a plague hospital. Apartment 18 stood directly on the spot where hundreds of the infected died, isolated and abandoned during the final fevered hours of their lives. Records showed that during construction, one room kept collapsing. 3 workers died trying to erect it. That room later became apartment 18. Even worse, every resident who ever lived in that apartment either disappeared, went mad, or died under violent and strange circumstances. But it was too late. Rafik had stayed too long. Now, the shadows followed him everywhere. Mirrors stopped showing his reflection. Instead, they showed apartment 18, always empty, yet always moving. His reflection was replaced by a figure that stared back with the same eyes, but none of the soul. The voice on the phone returned. "Soon, you'll forget what outside feels like." He tried leaving. He packed his bags, raced to the elevator, only for the elevator to open into his apartment. Again, 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 time unraveled. He wandered the hallway, knocked on every neighbor's door, only to find the same hallway repeating endlessly, door after door. The only constant, apartment 18. No matter how far he walked, its door waited ahead. He tried jumping from the fire escape, but as he plummeted, the city warped around him, and he landed on his own bed, unharmed, trembling, screaming. Now, the whispers weren't just in the walls. They were in him. "Welcome home," they said. The furniture rearranged itself overnight. The lights flickered in rhythmic Morse code. He recorded them, played it back. "You are the last. Become us." And then, the final horror point one morning, he looked into the hallway mirror and saw nothing. No reflection. Behind him, apartment 18 stood open, a perfect mirror of his own apartment. Inside it stood Rafik, the other Rafik. Smiling, he turned slowly to face him, stepping out of the mirror apartment, dressed identically, movements smooth, but not human. "You didn't leave," it said. "So I came for you." The walls of the apartment groaned. Every portrait on the walls turned to show screaming faces. The floorboards whispered names. Rafik tried to run, but the lights went out. And when they returned, only one Rafik remained. He now greets visitors with a warm smile. He answers the phone promptly at 3:18 a.m., and he makes sure the door to apartment 18 is always unlocked for the next guest. Because the apartment needs someone that always .it breathes .it remembers, and now it wears a new face. Apartment 18, the final part, the silence that followed the last scream in apartment 18 wasn't peace. It was vacancy. The kind of silence left behind not by relief, but by absence, like the breathless void that lingers after a body stops moving, but before anyone notices it's dead. Mira sat in the hallway just outside the apartment, her back against the wall, hands streaked in dust and blood. Her eyes didn't blink. They simply stared at the jagged open door where number 18 stood, not quite closed, not quite open. Behind it, nothing moved. No light bled through, not even sound. But she knew. It wasn't over. She could still feel it, humming low in her chest like the echo of a scream trapped behind drywall. For a moment, she thought she might pass out. But instead, She reached for her phone, only to find it cracked in half, its screen black and unresponsive. "Don't go back in there," whispered a voice behind her. She turned. It was Eli, the building's maintenance man. His face was sunken and pale, eyes hollow from secrets long buried. He hadn't spoken much in the last few weeks, only watched. But now, his voice carried urgency Mira hadn't heard from anyone in this cursed place. "You knew," she whispered. "You always knew." Eli didn't deny it. He simply nodded. "I was told never to speak of it, never to open the past. But it keeps waking up." Mira rose, shaky on her feet. "Then tell me everything, because I'm going to finish it." The basement. That's where he led her. Down past flickering stairwells and rusted rails, beneath the apartment's foundation, where no residents were allowed. The air grew colder the farther they descended, as if the warmth of the world above was being peeled away. By the time they reached the sealed steel door at the bottom, Myra's breath fogged in the air. Eli stopped. "Behind here. It's where the old apartment was buried." Mira frowned. "Old apartment?" "This building was rebuilt 30 years ago, after the fire. But the land, it's older. The original structure had a room beneath the foundation. That's where the girl died." A cold shiver crawled down Myra's spine. "You mean the girl in 18? He nodded. "She wasn't a tenant. She was left behind, chained in a hidden room. The original landlord kept her there. They say he thought she was possessed, that she spoke with shadows." Mira pressed her palm against the steel door. "How do we get in?" Eli hesitated. "We don't. That's the one rule. If we open this, it won't just wake her. It will wake everything." She looked him in the eye. "Then help me break the rule." They pried open the rusted seal with tools scavenged from the boiler room. The door moaned open like a wound being forced apart. Beyond it, the passage sloped downward, carved in raw earth and stone. And at the end, a room, small, circular. Candle stubs burned out in the corners. Wax melted into symbols on the floor. In the center, a bed frame bolted to the floor, its mattress stained and shredded. Chains still hung from the posts, and on the wall, her name, carved into stone. Over and over and over again, Enora. Myra's breath caught. She hadn't heard that name before, and yet it felt familiar. A deep ache bloomed in her chest. The moment she stepped fully into the chamber, the door behind her slammed shut. Eli turned, startled, but it was too late. That a voice whispered in the dark, "You're not her." The light disappeared. It wasn't like the power had failed. It was like the idea of light had been erased from existence. Mira clutched her chest. Her heart thundered, but she stood firm. "Enora," she said aloud, "I know you're here." A presence moved just behind her. A brush of air, cold fingers on her neck. "You took my name," the voice hissed. "No," Mira said, "but I saw you. In my dreams. In the mirror. In every shadow since I moved here." The presence circled her. The chains began to rattle. "You remember now," Enora said. "You were always meant to be the key. I called for you, and you came." Mira turned, straining to see anything. "Why me?" "Because you listened," the girl hissed, her voice fractured like broken glass. "You were the only one who didn't run when the walls began to bleed. The only one who asked who I was instead of praying I'd go away." And then, a flash. A vision. A young girl, locked in this room, begging through the wall as flames devoured the house above. Screaming for help. Screaming until her throat bled. And oh, one came. Not until now. Back in the room, Mira reached forward. "What do you want?" "Justice," Enora whispered. "Not revenge. Not death. I want to be remembered." The symbols on the ground glowed faintly. One by one, candles reignited. Eli stood, stunned, against the far wall. "Then show me how," Mira said. Enora's voice softened. "Bury my bones properly. Tell my story. Burn this room, so no one else becomes me. Mira nodded. I will. The chains dropped. The walls shook. A wail, long, echoing, and final, shattered through the foundation as the chamber began to collapse. They barely escaped. Mira and Eli scrambled back into the basement just before the passage caved in entirely. Dust roared out from behind them, but nothing chased them. Not this time. In the morning, the police came. The bones were recovered. The story made the news. Honora's name was finally spoken aloud by people who mattered. In apartment 18, it stood empty. The landlord refused to rent it again. Over time, the entire building emptied out, but Mira stayed. Not in 18, never again, but close enough to keep watch. Every night, she lit a candle, not to ward off the spirits, but to honor the girl who waited in darkness far too long. The curse was broken, but sometimes, when the wind howls down the hallway and the floor creaks without reason, Mira hears a whisper, not angry, not afraid, just grateful, and she whispers back, I remember you, Honora. Always. Thanks for listening to the final chapter of Haunted Apartment 18. If this chilling tale kept you awake tonight, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more haunting stories every week. Share your thoughts. What do you think truly lurked behind the doors of Apartment 18? Did the curse really end? Turn on notifications so you never miss another deep sleep horror story that blends mystery, suspense, and the supernatural. More stories you'll love. Check out our playlist for other long-format horror sleep stories filled with secrets, shadows, and unforgettable twists. Good night, if you can sleep.